Va bene? Perfetto.
cambiare la batteria, scusa poi.
Vabbè.
the last 10 years, but I know it has started much, much earlier. And some of you are around who have made it happen. And I think they have been right from the start part of the Eden community, and the Eden community has always advocated a very ambitious EU agenda in education. And as practitioners of innovation in education, EU have been at the forefront of online and distance learning long before this has become mainstream. And I'll come back to this point. We, therefore, appreciate your role in the academic and policy debate, because such a debate is necessary. The Eden community, and more generally speaking, distance and online learning stakeholders, have been always about overcoming specific, let's say, obstacle. If you think back to the roots of the online learning community and the open universities, to grant access, to make more of the technological developments. And I think that you have been also at the core of a much larger trend, namely one that we fully support, one on democratizing education. Education has never been more important for EU policies than today, and this sounds like the flattest cliche there is, but I would try to explain why I think this is true. Some 6 months ago, the European leaders, this is the member states leaders, have gathered in Gothenburg to discuss education. And this was the very first time this has happened. So President Macron, Bundeskanzlerin Merkel, and all their peers have discussed education for the very first time in one of their meetings of the Council. And in the eve of this discussion, the Commission has presented an ambitious agenda for what we called a European education area by 2025. And of course, it is very easy to dismiss this as a political talk, because talking about education is very easy. Every one of us has somehow a connection to it. Some of us have kids. I would go on and say that next to football, this is the other thing which is very easy to talk about, and all of us are somehow experts in it. But if you look at what has happened since the last 6 months, I think that you will see that maybe this time around the momentum is a bit different. So first of all, just 2 months after the Gothenburg summit, the Commission has put forward the first package of the first education package, which contained a few important documents, one of which we were directly involved in our community, which is the Digital Education Action Plan, which I'll come back a little bit later on, but also the recommendation for the proposal for Council recommendation on key competences, which includes obviously digital competences and skills. A few months later, in May, the Commission delivered then a second education package with recommendations on mobility, on language learning, on early childhood support, and a few other items. And then, of course, what is very important, and I think symbolic at the same time, is that in May as well, the Commission has put forward a proposal for the budget 2021-2027, which we are in the middle of, as you know, developing, or you may know, and negotiating. And in this, the Commission has proposed to double the budget of the Erasmus program. And this is around 30 billion euros now as a proposal. And we see a great political support from across the different member states to make Erasmus basically twice as big as it is today. And today it's quite big already. And in addition to it, to increase the budget for the research and innovation program, which also affects our community here, by around 30%. These two obviously are among the more sort of the winners of the different negotiations, and we expect that the Parliament as well will be quite supportive. So we expect to see a very big, possibly the biggest increase so far in the Erasmus program. And we firmly believe that the EU should lead by example, matching the ambition with resources. And I think by spending in education, research and innovation, we invest in people, and we shape the society of tomorrow. One particular subject which is very relevant for me, because I'm involved also in the development of innovation policy and the sort of the interface between education and innovation, is that education and training are partly so important because they directly contribute to innovation, and this has become truly recognized at the political level. And our university should be able to successfully train the next generations of researchers and innovators. And this means that we need universities which are fit for purpose, which are open, more entrepreneurial. And this in turn requires the development of new learning and teaching environments, multidisciplinary teams, innovation teams, etc. We also need the university to have stronger links with the local community and also the business sector. Higher education more generally should be about innovation and civic hubs, which are rooted in their local environment, yet are open to the world. And we know very well the main shortcomings which face our innovation landscape. They include skills shortages and mismatches, poor infrastructure and lack of investment. And we also know what should be done to overcome these shortcomings, but still our innovation capacity is far from reaching our research capacity and our research excellence, which we know is well recognized. The Commission encourages and supports higher education and the transformation of higher education with a number of initiatives. I will not list them all here because it won't do any justice to some which I may forget. But in any case, maybe mentioning initiatives such as the European Institute of Innovation and Technology is relevant. The EIT will also, at least this is the proposal of the Commission, will also receive a budget increase, and we expect the EIT to play a very strong role when it comes to integrating education in the innovation policy. So far, education and innovation policies have been somewhat not fully in line, if you like, with each other, and we try to integrate them better, and one of the instruments is the EIT. So the EU, of course, can drive and support innovation policies, but innovation appears locally in the regions, here, in this city, in this university, in the labs, in the lecture halls. And therefore, what we need is solutions which have to be developed in close collaborations with those active on the ground, universities, research organizations, companies, but also NGOs and citizens. And there are many challenges to make this happen, and I would like to highlight some of them by my own interpretation of the macro, meso, and the micro level. So you will excuse me if I don't entirely go into the interpretation that you may have, but if I start with the macro level, this would be the system level, if you like, which for me would define more generally the societies, the societies we have. So the late Zygmunt Bauman, which some of you may know, spoke of today's world using the term liquid modernity. And he used this to describe the condition of constant mobility and change in relationships, identities, global economics within our contemporary society. And his view was that change is occurring more and more rapidly than it used to happen in the past. And I think that we are definitely, if not in a liquid one, then we are at least in an under pressure type of society. We are under pressure from increased migration flows, or socioeconomic and cultural transformations, or we are under pressure from new forms of technology development, from the impact of digital practice on our lives, on our work, on the studies, and of course from various political developments. Another very famous scholar, Manuel Castells, was instead talking about the information age, and where the economy would be based on the flow of information and knowledge, and where, for example, the company's competitiveness would depend on their knowledge of technology, information, and access to networks. And we see that this is happening. So these great minds have seen early on that society is evolving fast, and indeed the speed of this change is accelerating, and that information, knowledge, and here I would add data, and the ability to make sense of those have become key competitive factors. And we see this very clearly at the macro level. Careers are changing and are more fragmented than before. There are different needs in the job market and requests for higher profiles. There is a necessity for lifelong learning. At the same time, Europe has never been so well educated, if you look at the statistics. In 2009, there was an agreement between the European Union member states to have a benchmark on higher education, which some of you may know is about 40%. Obviously, the justification being that we need more people coming from higher education because we need this type of specific skills and competences. The member states have set national targets, and we are very close to reaching this target of 40%. We are right now around 39%. But it's not just about the numbers. I think there is something much more important, and here, when I think about the Eden community and the stakeholders, I'm thinking, of course, about access to higher education and for the different profiles of students. And I think one of the main challenges of higher education institutions, and you know this much better than I do, is about providing access to a wide number of students, because when we provide access, we open up opportunities. The other challenge is retaining students, keeping them there, and allowing them to succeed. And in order to do so, we need to consider, of course, what type of problems these students face. And the idea of the young person who would go on and study for 4 years or for 5 years, and after a degree they would get a job and maybe they would marry and start a family, it's just not a correct generalization anymore. There might be a person who does this like that, in this order, but it's just not as common nowadays as it used to be. And what we are facing today is a completely different population, which you know as well much better than me, but still let me make that point. So the students of today, they work, they're older, they delay their studies, they return to study. The number of non-traditional students is on the rise, and indeed you have one of them in front of you. I'm also a student in one of the open universities. So what you see in the data is that the recently published Euro Student report in 2018, which combines data from most of the European countries, basically highlights that on average, slightly more than half of all students are combining study and paid jobs. And this is a challenge which applies to more and more people in more and more member states. So how are we addressing this at the policy level? Last month in Paris, on 23rd to 25th of May, the Ministerial Conference of the European Higher Education Area took place, and ministers signed the so-called Paris Communiqué. In this, they have called for a more ambitious higher education area beyond 2020, and this communiqué outlined the vision of the Bologna group for an inclusive and innovative approach to learning and teaching, for an integrated transnational cooperation in higher education, research and innovation, and for securing a sustainable future through higher education. These ambitions are fully in line with the ambitions of the Commission, which, as I explained, has put forward a number of packages enabling recognition for all, mobility for as many as possible, even though we like to say mobility for all. It won't be possible with the next budget, but still it will be more than today. And specifically the Bologna Policy Forum, which is embedded within this format, focused on two main topics, which I think are quite relevant: inclusiveness in education and the civic and social responsibility of universities. Our view, the Commission's contribution in this specific policy forum was that even though the Bologna process has led to more inclusion, disadvantaged learnings are still facing barriers to access, and this is why it is vital that we continue to work together, not only within countries but also across borders. And the proposed doubling of the Erasmus Plus budget should help us to achieve this goal. If I move to the meso level, which I like to define as the institutional level, so the level of the university or the higher education institution, one of the most pressing drivers which I would like to highlight is the digital transformation and the advent of digital tools and devices, their penetration in the daily life. It starts from very early on. It starts really from 12-year-olds. I think 90% of 12 years olds today have a mobile smartphone. Obviously, this impacts the way we study and work and live. And we believe that digital transformation is a driver for innovation. The entry point for digital transformation in higher education was through teaching, obviously. For many higher education institutions and their staff, digitization equaled online learning. And a couple of years ago, MOOCs were spoken of as a tsunami that will hit and maybe displace and substitute higher education as being able to quickly and in a flexible way adapt to the changing needs of students. But what is the situation today? In 2017, there is more offer in terms of MOOCs than ever. The MOOC landscape has grown to include more than 9,000 courses, more than 500 MOOC-based credentials, and more than a dozen graduate degrees. The total number of MOOCs available to register for any point of time is larger than ever. However, what we see is that for the first time, there seems to be a slowdown in the number of learners. And I won't speculate on the reasons for that. So, though growth in new learners is stagnating, the number of paying users is increasing. Some statistics which I have gotten access to tells me that Coursera saw paying users increase by 70% last year. Meanwhile, Udacity has more than 50,000 paying students enrolled in its nano-degree programs. Some of these platforms, they do deals directly with multinationals. You know probably about the cooperation of AT&T, and I think it's Udacity, if I'm not wrong. So as these MOOCs platform and all of them overseas continue the quest for sustainable revenue, MOOC providers have begun to charge not just for certificates, but also for other credentials and for content. And the providers have now product at every price point, from free to a few dollars to many, many more. So what is going to be our answer to this development? I'm sure that some of it will be discussed here in Genova in the next few days. And when doing so, I think it's very important to think about innovation, as we all know that we need to think of new problems in a new way. So the replication of a model that works or has worked for a certain moment of time is definitely not a recipe for its future success. And this is why we should continue to innovate. We also need a wider reflection on innovation in higher education more generally, because of the digital transformation. In order for universities to reap the benefits of digital, we have to reflect on how it affects the three missions, namely teaching, research, and service. For example, when it comes to the impact of teaching and learning, there is already a fundamental shift in the delivery. Technologies make learning accessible to those who would have previously found it difficult, and I think this needs to be continued and expanded. Secondly, when it comes to research, the impact is at least as significant. On the one hand, it emerges in the way of organizing, managing, and distributing the research outputs, while on the other hand, it has shaped the way in which researchers work, the way they interact, and the way they collaborate. Finally, when it comes to the third mission of HEIs, namely applying knowledge through services, the digital transformation provides unprecedented opportunities to reach out to a variety of stakeholders, to explore new models, and to place itself at the center of the local community and within a rich international network. And the adoption of digital technology in a university should not be based on a tick box approach, but on a holistic one. And for this reason, for example, one of our tools that we support and which addresses universities, which some of you may know, H-Innovate, we have last Friday launched a new module on the H-Innovate tool, which is covering digital capabilities. For those of you who do not know it, H-Innovate is a self-assessment tool for higher education institutions who wish to explore their innovative potential. And it's a joint initiative of the European Commission and the OECD. It's based on a self-assessment plus country reviews, and so far more than 900 universities worldwide have used it. Finally, the micro level if we think of it, or if I think of it, I see a main concern in terms of the mismatch between the skills Europe needs and the skills it has. And many parts of the EU are experiencing shortages in certain high-skill professions, both in terms of qualifications and the quality of the skills. At the same time, too many students graduate with poor skills. And this gap, if anything, seems to grow and not to close, which is a very disturbing fact. And we know that to reply to this challenge, lifelong learning, reskilling, and upskilling are more important than ever. And we know also that a variety of educational organizations will need to innovate to provide the answers, and some of those may even not exist today. So the challenge that is currently addressed at HEIs with a wider range of course choices, including 2 years degrees and options for continuous development, is good, but possibly we need to look further. And technology offers new ways to structure the way learning and teaching are organized, including through open, online, and blended learning. So how are we actually responding to the different, or to the interpretation of the challenges of at the macro, meso, and micro level? Last time when I had the honor to address this community, approximately 1 year ago at Jönköping University, I shared with you some ideas which I had about the need for a more consolidated, a more integrated, and a more coherent EU policy when it comes to the field of digital education. And I know that this term is not ideal, but I made a case that we need more consolidation and more integration in order to have more impact. We have been past the hype cycle for a few years now, and I think we are still facing a moment of truth. And out of this need to take a more integrated, holistic, and coherent approach, we have launched what I mentioned earlier, the Digital Education Action Plan in January, as part of the European Education Area Vision. And I will not now describe the action plan in detail, because I think there would be an opportunity to talk about this a bit later. But before I come to a closing, let me just mention maybe that with this action plan, what we are trying to do is to take a more realistic approach towards what the EU can do in terms of digital education, while having in mind that when it comes to education, we still have subsidiarity. We probably will have subsidiarity forever, and the whole point of this action plan is to focus on something which can be delivered through the EU, and to make more of what exists there today. And this is why this action plan is limited to 2020, so it has only 3 years or 2.5 years of delivery. However, what we hope is that it will lay down momentum for something which will come after 2020, and will help to start a more ambitious effort at the EU level. What I can share with you is just a few anecdotes, maybe nothing statistically evident, but we have seen in the last few months a very positive policy echo from the member states. Several member states, some of them, I'm not going to mention them, it won't be appropriate, but some of them who are more traditionally reserved have been extremely positive and have engaged with us in bilateral discussions on how to align this action plan with their national policies. Several national parliaments have shared with us their views and have asked for follow-up and discussions. I know also from ongoing discussions in Brussels that both the European Parliament plans an own initiative in this field, as well as the Committee of the Regions. So we have some hearings with them. This is, as I said, just anecdotal, and it's just the last few months. But this is what I can share with you in terms of what is the echo of the action plan. So before I conclude, maybe I would like to share with you some final thoughts about today, and what I thought is relevant for me to say. First of all, the macro, the meso, and the micro levels should not be looked at isolation. Of course, in the ideal world of Max Weber, everything is perfect, and we can structure everything according to a perfect case. But in reality, of course, all of this is much more messy, as we know. and what we need is an integrative approach. So if I can put it a little bit bluntly, we should not expect from hardware to solve problems which are due to a bug in a software and vice versa. So we should have an integrated approach in this field. Secondly, for us, very important for our policy specifically is that the digital transformation requires a holistic approach that goes beyond online learning or digital infrastructure. Infrastructure is very important, but it won't help if there is nothing which follows up on it. And change is ongoing, and I have mentioned that there are tools which are there to support, such as H-Innovate. Third, new skill sets are emerging that take the digital skills to a new dimension. And in developing digital skills and capabilities, we should take an integrated and not a vertical approach. Of course, there would be always need for artificial intelligence or big data specialists on the top of the pyramid, and we should cater for those. And I think that some of the initiatives of the Commission will do so. But we should take an integrative approach towards the digital skills competences, because they are evolving all the time, as opposed to, say, literacy, reading, or mathematics. And finally, I think you have a very important role in all of this. As practitioners of innovation in education, I would like to encourage you to take an active role in this debate, in the future policy shaping, in the future academic debate, which contributes to the policy shaping, and to link to initiatives which the EU is today launching or has already mentioned. I think that the debate between yourselves and, for example, the EIT could be a very interesting one. We could facilitate such a debate, and I would like to encourage you to take an active role in this exercise in order to shape it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very successful conference.
Thank you very much, Georgi. In a rush, I forgot to mention some short bio, but I think the audience already got to know you from also as one of the creator, I would say, of European Institute of Innovation and Technology and supporter. And I think this is a great opportunity that you mentioned in terms of synergies and links with what professional community does in order how to reach research results that we expect from them in Europe. But now I would like to open a very short time for questions from the audience. And we have a microphone? No? Okay, but maybe we will manage if there is an urgent question to Georgi. It's difficult sometimes for us practitioners to have a link with the policies. On the other hand, I already understand, being a part of the Digital Skills and Competences Working Group, how difficult it is for policymakers not to hear the voice of practitioners. But taking this opportunity, I would like to thank you personally very much for helping us to bring these messages to professional community and vice versa. And I think the positive developments have already reached our community, and we appreciate a lot your support in this development and your colleagues very much. I think we have some technical issues with the microphone and people don't dare to ask questions without it. The next and maybe the final chance will be the policy workshop that will be happening right after the conference. So I will continue by issuing the certificate of honor to you for this keynote, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now we continue, and I invite here Fabrizio Cardinale, chair and founder of Knowledge Hedge Consulting on Human Robotics and Machine Learning, for the presentation that has a very tricky title, 7 minutes to midnight, how the next industrial revolution will disrupt our workplace and skills forever. Do you want to sit here maybe?
No, I'll stay up. Okay. Stay up and try to wake everybody relaxed, but looking some videos and some more animation to explain what the future looks like. So my presentation is going to be about the future and the next industrial revolution, which presumably we'll still need to understand better, and how this will completely and dramatically change the workplace of us all. Some of you might know me as a technologist of learning technologies. I've been around the last 25 years developing learning technologies since the early days of the Delta program, for those of you who were around. And it was nice times, but things are changing and have changed dramatically over the last 5 years. So I had to repolish a little bit of my old degree in engineering artificial intelligence. I was one of the first European to be degreed in AI in the 80s, first of the 90s, and AI was completely different in those days, and I had to repolish it a little bit to get back into the business with consultancy. I displaced a set of, I exited a set of learning technologies companies like Junti Labs, Harvest Road Hive, Exact Learning, LCMS, which some of you might have been using, but the future is mostly about machine learning and the integration of machines within the equation. So we are now a consulting firm, and we help large organizations to look into the future and start using robotics and machine learning within their settings. When we go and do executive speeches, we try to talk of the future looking into the past, which is something that Mr. Churchill told us to do very effectively. And you might be aware of we do this with a time distortion mechanism using a new time. Big Bang in the 1st of January, and the day of today into the 31st of December. And discovering that Homo sapiens and all the things that we're talking about to some extent happen in the last minutes to midnight. To take this approach today, I've reduced a little bit of time scale, talking of a 24-hour clock, which we have called the innovation clock, in where we put the Anno Domini 0 at hour 0, so the starting of the, let's say, a lot of the Western society's history tracking, and the 24th hour is the Singularity Point. I think you all know what Singularity is. It's the time where machines start to be more intelligent than people, and Kurzweil, which is a very famous futurist and is actually chief engineer in Google, by the way, he positioned this in 2029. So if you put that as the 24 hours and you start mapping the history of innovation, you see that the first thing which actually happens, it happens very late in the afternoon, more or less at 5:30 p.m., where we had the first explosion of knowledge, and actually maybe the last one which Europe really ruled over the world, which was the Renaissance. And what happened in those days was that we had presumably the perfect knowledge storm. We had a capital venture, Leonardo il Magnifico, which wanted to bring people with interdisciplinary background into Florence, which was a very small town, and start each other to contaminate each other and create science and technology, medicine, and so on. And today there are a lot of professors which are studying what is known as the Medici Effect to try to recreate that sort of perfect knowledge storm for their society. And what is good in the book, which by the way you can freely download from the web, is that it's not about innovation, which is typically directional and closed, especially in mesosystems. It's actually all about intersectional creativity, which means that real knowledge explosion happens only when you put people with different backgrounds. And the contribution I want to give today is about a technological background with people with other background like you, which are surely much more educated than I am. And if you see the history of marketing, this has happened in Ferrari, has happened in Apple, has happened in all the big brands, where it wasn't just the engineers which had the place, but it was actually much more even humanistics. We'll see more about this later on. But I mean, it then took more or less 3 hours to start exploiting what the science of the Renaissance started to build. Actually, you had to discover the world. And we heard, thank you for the reference, that a lot of the world was discovery actually leaving from Genoa in the old days. But it took more or less 3 hours in a 24-hour clock to bring back goods and start to industrialize it. It was the matter of cotton, which was brought back in Europe more or less in 1780s. And we had that guy, Samuel Compton, which invented in a very humble cottage in the middle of Sheffield, the spinning mule, which was the first form of mechanization where you could actually start producing goods with the cotton which was coming back from the Americas. But that wasn't enough. The guy didn't become rich. He actually didn't patent the solution and died in disgrace. And this taught us a lot of things that eventually get even more evident with the advent of Mr. Watt, which more or less at 9:13 p.m. invents the steam engine, which is more or less what Mr. Jan Morris highlights very effectively, being one of the 4 pillars of civilization, the ability of capturing energy. Only when we were able to capture energy, and data is a form of energy, and dispatch it effectively, you had a leapfrog jump forward in civilization. The other 3 pillars, which are quite independent but relevant, are the ability to organize people, to gather them in agoras or in schools, and start talking to them and teach them and communicate them, but also information processing, obviously, the information that you convey and that you share, and last but not least, and we'll see this especially in the 2 world wars, the ability of doing war, which is obviously a great negative effect, but the impulse that it gives in innovation, we'll see it later in the clock, is quite dramatic. What happens thereafter with the first industrial revolution is a lot of the industrialization that we were used to up to yesterday. Big people moving to towns because the energy was there. You couldn't just simply move it around. A lot of populations coming into big Paris, Rome, London. A lot of pollution, a lot of very difficult social conditions, but also the explosion of communication, like the inventing of the rotative printing, where you actually started to communicate, and trade unions start to get also to be established. But there was a big issue there. You couldn't convey energy detaching it from the people. So you actually have the energy nearby the people. Things weren't that perfect, and scientists started studying, and the things were more or less resolved around 10:41 p.m. where these 2 guys, Edison and Westinghouse, started a very fierce debate known as the War of Currents. It's actually a film which is coming out in the TV shows in these days, which really shows how fierce was the battle in moving energy and therefore information from the towns back into the countryside, so that you can unbundle energy and power from the consumption of it. Actually, it was also a very good lesson learned from the past for the sake of talent. Who knows who the guy on the bottom there is? Okay, it's Mr. Tesla. It's not a car, it's actually a scientist. And he was very popular in those days because he was a mad inventor. He actually had very consciousness inventions, but also mad ones like the laser beam or other things, which were, again, related to war. And these 2 guys, Edison and Westinghouse, quarreled over his talent. Actually, Edison didn't believe that the idea of alternated current, which Tesla was suggesting as a means to transpose energy and to transport it, was so effective, and he fired, to some extent, Mr. Tesla, who went out, quitted Edison, went into Westinghouse, which was a much more clever business guy than a technician, and actually hired Tesla, recognizing the proof of talent into him. He invented AC, which de facto is the way today that you transpose energy from the countryside into towns without having to have too much pollution or condensation inside the town itself. And things, as I said, just boomed out. When you unbundle energy from delivery, things boom. And what happened from 1870 to 1984 is the second industrial revolution, the main one. the one of the production lines, the one of any color as far as it's black, which what Mr. Ford said of the assembly line for the Ford, and so on, but also new media like videos and radios, which we are starting to use in education very effectively, were actually invented more or less at 11:30 p.m. with Mr. Marconi and John Baird inventing TVs and radios. And then came the war. And obviously war is a very, very negative aspect. We are not questioning that, but you have a peak of invention and innovation where it's very important for those coming after to understand the value of it and exploit it in the right direction. What happened in the First World War was that technology just boosted, and it's the first time that we start talking of technological unemployment. It was a term invented by Keynes, which we all know him being a very important financial guy of the US government during the First World War. And what he said was that, you know, in a couple of decades, mankind would have been displaced by machines and technology. He left a very nice booklet, again free to download, which is a message or a pamphlet to his grandchildren, where he said that in 30, 40 years' time, we would have worked 4 times less and produced 4 times more. He more or less got half of the equation right. Today we are producing 4 times more. The problem is that we're working even more than Keynes' time, so something went wrong presumably in his estimations. But the good thing of Keynes was that he understood very brilliantly that it wasn't the meltdown of Wall Street the problem. It would have passed, as all the meltdowns of the Wall Streets have passed even in our days, but it's understanding and learning from those meltdowns what should be invested and what should be promoted thereafter. And somebody who really understood this was Mr. and President Kennedy. They were laying on fences, sitting on fences after Second World War. A lot of Nazi scientists flew to the US and to the Russia, and they all started building what has been the peak of scientific development after the Renaissance, which has been rocket science. And you know, the Americans were just sitting on fences and relaxing because they won the Second World War, believing to be the rulers of the world, and suddenly something passed from east to west on the sky, and they just woke up. It was the Sputnik, the first launch interorbital, which happened by the Russians, but not by the Americans, and they suddenly wake up. And it was a politician debate, and Kennedy was very wise to gather all the community, interdisciplinary community. There were investors, there were businessmen, there were academics, and there were youngsters there, and in a stadium, in Rice Stadium in Texas, and doing the very famous speech that you can get on the internet about we will go to the moon in 10 years' time, whatever it takes and whatever needs to be done. And that actually happened, and it happened at a fast and performance which was unparalleled today. A lot of people were displaced. This is very well explained in the Hidden Figures film, which in Italian is translated Il diritto di contare, the right to count, which I think is, again, one time that Italians translate at least the title much better than the English one, The Right to Count, because counting to those days was done by ladies. Do you know the names of those ladies as a job description? They were called computers, because they were actually computing all the analytics and all the big data. And by the way, backpropagation, which is at the basis of AI today, you know, those wonderful recognition of cats on Google, it's based on one algo, which is quite questionable, but it's very, as a black box, it works very well, was actually invented by the launch of the Apollo and the people and mathematicians who did that. And this was a very good example of people hitting back, and these ladies just didn't get disaffected of education. They studied, they learned how to master big IBM, which was placed there for getting to the moon, and they became programmers, and they were managers rather than computers, starting to manage people which had to program the computer. And here, off we come to our days, actually. Sorry, down here, this is where we start talking of digital transformation. Why is digital transformation so different from the other ones? I would call it digital waves rather than revolution or transformation. Is because things starting to happen by waves and time accelerated. If you see after what happened after the Steve Jobs launched the Mac in '82, is that things have started to collapse in time and be much more exponential. You have Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg opening their sites in 11:35 and 11:44 p.m. And we all know how that story ended up. And we have Steve Jobs launching the iPhone in 11:45 and so on. So the message here is that we have this Moore's law where every year things double. And you know, you start understanding doubling up to more or less 2 at square, let's say 24 or 16. But when you get into the second part, and you can see that with the chessboard over there, when you get into the second part of the chessboard by doubling, the amount of rice grains that you need for doing 2 at the 18th is similar to the Himalaya mountain. And if you get down to 2 at the 32, it's all the world covered by an Everest hive of rice. So it's a huge amount, and it just gets out of our comprehension and understanding. And if you count how long it took from the invention of the transistor, more or less, and the launch of the Mac in '82, we are now exactly entering into the second half of the chessboard for what concerns the Moore law. So we are having a doubling effect, which is dramatically exponential, and it's out of control to some extent. I would set a day for this change in 2016 when Google DeepMind, a new startup in London, quickly bought off by Google, won the Go game, which is much, much more complicated than chess, using a computer with AI-powered deep learning algorithm against the Chinese world leading of Go. And the difference there is that chess is rational. You can program it, and that was the AI first generation, where I was actually degreed. You can put some if-then-else rules. But if you look at Go, it's a visual game. So you need to understand how you can block your enemy by putting color stones around him. And there's no rule, there's no elicitation of knowledge there, it's just a visual impact. And AI and robotic is very good at machine vision and understanding that intelligence, and that's why they did it. But there's a huge difference between the previous digital transformation, the one that we're all talking about, social, cloud, mobile, and big data. You see all our conferences been talking about that. That is the past. I mean, it's already gone, it's now a commodity, and we're starting to embrace it in education. Good enough, but we are normalizing the past. We should do it because education is a commodity to some extent, and don't take it as a negative fact. Is, you know, the world needs education. Why shouldn't it use the available technology at state of the art? But what's happening is that the new revolution, where you have the blending of IoT, blockchain, edge, and AI, is completely different in terms of acceleration, but with one key point: it's got machines at its heart and not the human being. Doesn't mean that the man is not important, but the idea there is that you're getting machines to be better, possibly to collaborate and work together with the man. So what happens here is that surely this new revolution will be transformational. This is a Gartner slide about the new world, which the former digital transformation nexus of social, mobile, cloud, and big data brought. And it's also infrastructural. So more and more we're going towards ecosystems rather than holistic ecosystems rather than silos. But what's really unique here is that it's exponential. It's combinatorial because things are actually interacting and intersecting in terms of technology. It's holistic, as we said before. This is a quite complex slide, but the idea here is that if you leave behind your people, where you do micro-innovation here, you will have a much longer step and pathway to seek education if you don't bring them with you while you're doing changes. So not only structure and IT, but people and processes are the real pillar of this next generation transformation. And last but not least, it will need to be far more regulated because things are getting blurred. Black box AI is getting very popular, but can we afford black box AI? We can afford it if it's a matter of recognizing all your mates on Facebook, no problem with that. But if you're starting to doing medical diagnosis, legal advice, financial routing, you can't do the data in a black box. You shouldn't even doing it by sending the data on the other side of the world in a very complex data room, which, by the way, consumes $16,000 of electricity just to run a deep learning training exercise of one of these neural networks, and get back the response. This should be much more near to you, by the edge, which is one of the conversions happening. It should be much more chip-based on hardware, and it should be much more secure, trusted, and shareable blockchain and trusted execution environments. So here comes the new jobs. Jobs are going to be dramatically affected by all this. The numbers are quite dramatic. We know that 57% of the jobs are at risk. This is Oxford University saying it. And you might question, it's already happened. It happened in the agricultural change into the industry. More or less 80% of the US was based on agriculture. Now it's 2%, but we just, we survived. We just developed new skills and moved over. This is quite different. It's much more holistic. It's much more pervasive. There will be no job that you can move into. You will not be leaving farms to go into McDonald's to do a waiter. Everything will be affected by what we're talking about here, like it or not. So the only way out is vertical, upskilling. So the only way that you can survive, and you can help your kids and your children or your students to survive, is vertical specialization, a sort of Darwinian specialization, as we will see. The thing is not just Italian, American, Europe, it's actually all the world. You see some numbers here, 57 is the average, and you have peaks in India and China. And it's not just industry. You see here, this is clerical work, this is construction work, this is transportation, food, and so on. It's going to be quite exponential and holistic. So we need to invent new disciplines. As No Hedge, what we do, we have actually coined it and as a new term, which is adding an R to the HRM equation, which is usually HR management in large corporates. What we suggest today is to add an R, which stands for robotics. So it's not just human resources, but it's also robotic resources. And how actually you can make them collaborate and work to optimize the skills of each other. And we've got a methodology there, which is named OK, Open Key Exponential Innovation, means that it's based on key exponential technologies. If you don't master AI, IoT, blockchain, edge computing, you will not understand what's happening. It's not only that, there's a lot of humanistics, as we will see, but you need to have that knowledge in your group. And you need to do what we call a skills balance plan. So you need to plan in your organization how much you want to give up of the human skills and at what time, conscious that it will happen anytime, and that presumably the higher skills in the ladder, critical, decisional, and cognitive, will be the last one to be tackled by the machine, and maybe where the human touch can have a strong competitive edge. And that's where we should invest. The 21st century skills are not social, are not collaboration, are not mobile any longer. They are much more about emotional intelligence, decision-taking, critical thinking, those things which luckily the machines will take longer to actually master. Who knows this chart? I see you nodding in a lot of other topics, so I guess where you're coming from. But I mean, this is a very famous chart of the 70s. I was studying robotics when I actually saw it first times in the 80s, 90s. It was by Professor Mori of University of Tokyo. He did actual experiments putting people in front of humanoids, computers, robots. And what happens is, you see there, you've got a steep curve where people like automation. Who's got Google Home at home? Buy it. It's incredible. You talk to it, it delivers you what you want, the receipt for your kitchen, the music you want to hear. We like it. Why do we like it? Because it's a box, it's quite ignorant, even if they say it's got a 6-year-old child brain, more or less, but you really understand that it's a machine. So that happens up to more or less some time of development of AI. But then you have this uncanny valley, the valley of inconfidence, where computers and robotics start to be too similar to humans. And you have this huge disaffection because you don't like people, which could be doing your activity, your jobs, and so on. Now, that curve happens to be dramatically different between Eastern and Western societies. Asiatics are far less have far less problems with the uncanny valley than Europeans and Westerners. We are much more afraid of technological automation and intelligence than they are. And this is a huge risk, because if we have a barrier to enter into this uncanny valley, we will never transit through it. And others will do it much better than we do. And you can do this, as I said before, by leveraging what are the typical human skills like emotional, communicational, social, and technological, and leaving to the machine things like collaboration, orchestration, interoperation, automation, which they are much good than us to do. And what you need to do is develop these nice graphics here, which is HRR collaboration touchpoints. You need to understand where you should be working with the machine and why. And that's about the holistic approach that we said before. So to cut a long story short, going back to Darwin, it's not going to be the wisest of us which will survive, the smartest teacher or the smartest student, but it's the guy which will be able to adapt, to understand that this world is coming, actually address it, and move with it very fast. And how fast it's coming is very well represented by these two videos which you find on YouTube, coming 10 years one from the other. In 2006, this was the stage of robotics. We have Honda presenting Asimo, the first walking robot out there. They were very proud of that. There was all the conference room, all the press, and this is what happened. That's 2006, and now you see the Honda engineers rushing up with a curtain to cover the poor guy and the disastrous performance that he did. This is Boston Dynamics. Who knows Boston Dynamics? Again. Boston Dynamics, a very, very important entrepreneurial case. They are integralist of robotics. They want the robot to work. They were bought by Google 5 or 6 years ago, where they wanted this robot to start iron, make ice creams, start doing jobs, because they wanted to place it into the households. They didn't bother about it walking, but so these guys, which are very strong robotics evangelists, broke up. They quarreled with Google. They got out because they want the machine to walk, and they got a lot of investments, and this is what they did in just a couple of years after they exited Google. Not within Google, but outside Google. It's incredible. I mean, this robot here can flip. Who of you can do this? So, again. But things are not just physical. They're actually getting much more collaborative, as I said. This is the JD warehouse in China. It's all moved by 4 persons, and all the others is robotics. But luckily, as I said before, robots are also getting very collaborative. This is ABB, you my robot, you see here. And this is robotic process automation, where you have some back office activities, which could be your information system in your university. Rather than having clerks doing that by hand, you can put a software robot on the back end, doing it in 1/15th or 1/20th of the time. And while these things are getting much clever, like Google Brain, I said here, is more or less positioned here, like a 6-year-old human, they're getting cheaper. Who knows the price of these computers, of these robots that you see down here? More or less $30,000 to $40,000. So they cost as much as an employee. You can actually teach them by driving their hands. You don't need to program them, and they're coming. So this to say that the world of work is going to dramatically change. It's going to change for doctors and surgeons. They were already questioned a lot by the cut-off prices from Chinese and Indians' economies. You could go to have a heart bypass surgery in India at 1/7 of the American or European cost. So that was a very fierce attack to the ecosystem of medicine in Western economies. But luckily we survived. We still have the best professionals out there. The second attack that we will have will be coming from countries which start doing these things in a remote, distant way by using robotics and AI and prosthetics, which, by the way, is a huge field. We will have the same change also in banks and insurances. For example, my kids don't bother about location of the bank. They will never subscribe to a bank just by location or by the rates. They don't even know what a rate, an interest rate is. They will go to the bank which offers the best tailored, personalized service. And this company, Lemonade, is just a bunch of guys. The first name is Daniel, which actually invented this company, which has got a lot of money now. They're using AI for a chatbot, which gives you your tailored insurance plan. And the thing is done with blockchains and social communities rather than with the big brother insurance behind themselves. And this is affecting energy, for example. You remember that we said the energy war, where things were decentralized. They're now coming back to be islands of DC current produced locally and consumed locally. It doesn't make sense to transform energy in AC if what produces it could be DC, like windmills or all the alternative sources, and if 90% of the power is consumed locally by transistors. And this is what these new guys are doing. Ewald and Dominic down there, they invented Iota. Who knows what Iota is? Iota is a revolutionary blockchain where the transactions are not between people on money, but they are between things on smart contracts for using the data from those things. So if you've got a meter, this meter, smart meter, can go and buy energy on the blockchain from the provider, which is more effective. Actually, you see it down here. This is the first petrol machine based on Iota blockchain in Holland. These are the streets which are generating electricity by streets with solar, covered by solar panels. And these are streets which are charging electric car, just going and driving over it. So there's a magnetic field, you don't need to stop, it gets automatically charged, microtransaction, micro payment on the contract, and so on. So last slide, very chaotic and crowded because that's what I wanted to transfer you, is that this will dramatically change education also. It's not there yet. You must not fear it, because otherwise you have the Morris syndrome of the uncanny valley and you will be left behind the journey. You must face it. You've got a lot of emotional skills. You've got what the World Economic Forum, read over here, says will be the 3 skills. You have at least 2, which are future fundamental. The first one is social and emotional skills. So if you teach to children, if you teach to students, if you know how to interact, you surely know how to do that better than a machine. Empathy, emotional intelligence, decision-taking, all these will be 24% more relevant by 2030 according to McKinsey. You need some technological skills. I mean, you are a distance education network, so you're much more favored than your colleagues, which are very physically located, if not bounded. And so you need to start open your mind towards all the things that you saw here and how they could eventually affect your systems. And finally, higher cognitive skills. You need to teach to the machine how to teach and learn. And that obviously can come only by those who have done it better than them over the last decades. And the future is very bright. You have computers with self-standing machine, like this one is Yoko, built in Japan for kids, where you just put things inside and it teaches you about that. There's sensors, there's IoT, there's intelligence. This is my way, which I'm proud to announce. It's an Italian patent of a new startup that we have founded as KnowEdge here in Genoa, in the AI hub by Microsoft, which is the main one in Europe, is here in Genoa. And that pyramid there is like a sort of Google Home for professionals. Rather than teaching you about weather conditions or recipes, it will give you advice. Image classification, legal debate, case-based reasoning, but with the huge difference that rather than going and pushing the big data to the Americas, it will be done locally on a chip computing, using AI intelligence on the deck, near the professional, using blockchain, and fully compatible with GDPR, where the American algos, lucky for us, are not yet compatible. Okay. That's more or less the talk. I hope I respected the timing. And I don't know if the questions are now or we'll take them later on. Thank you.
Take them. I'm sure there must be questions in the audience or in the panel. Thank you very much, Fabrizio. It was very, how to say, provoking, also interesting. At first, I give a chance for you to ask a question, make a comment, statement, feeling. Okay, please, we have a question over there. We don't have microphone. Can you please speak loud?
I still don't have a robotic ear, so unfortunately I didn't fully understand the second half. The world is changing?
Gender.
Okay, sure. That's a perfect question. Thank you for doing it. I mean, the big problem with black boxed AI, the deep learning one, is that you don't know the heuristic which happens inside. So there are a lot of studies today where, for example, on a job recruiting AI engine chatbot developed in California, it was exposed to a lot of rules about Hispanic people. So he was naturally taught to have some preconcepts. And that is a huge risk, because if it's not illicit, if the AI that we are going to use is going to be black boxed, we have a huge problem. Obviously, that could be with racial discrimination, gender discrimination, and so on. So I think that Europe has to play a leading edge challenge to bring back reasoning about multiple faceted AI. Let's not forget that backpropagation was invented in the Apollo days, and there's a huge set of other algorithms and other ways of doing AR which might be a little bit less performing on image recognition, but they are much more explicit, illicit, secure than others. And this is an open door for getting back in without risking a Marshall Plan for Europe about AI. Europe has got no single serious strategy about artificial intelligence. French, Germans have started, but if you look into the Japanese, the Asiatic market, the American market, it's a real national agenda to tackle this, even for the problems of social and racial discrimination that this could generate, much more automatically than today.
Please. Can you speak up, please?
Maybe they can come down.
Maybe you can come here. I give you the microphone.
Sorry.
Okay, so I'm on the edges of the field of robotics with my research, and I'm in the field where human-computer interaction takes place a lot more in my thinking, a lot more in how I interact with computers and how I allow others to interact with the computers that I'm working on. With your AI and where the computers are going, will it be much more human-based interaction, or will it be we have to adapt? Because my fear is that if it's not innate, then that will impede quite a lot of our human race who are impeded themselves, so ability needs and physical needs.
Yes, I think Georgie will also answer something maybe on this. For sure, ACI is a sector. Human-computer interaction is a huge sector for study, development, and research. And you're very correct when you say you need to set the balance. And that's exactly in the skills balancing plan that I was depicting before, where the focus is. You need to create interfaces. Today, interfaces, we think of IoT as hardware interfaces. So today we have more internet things on the internet than the Internet of Things. So we really need to interoperate, create an ecosystem, and create boundaries, but also open interoperability, which becomes very, very relevant. So I fully think that that's where the competitive edge of human beings is set. So I think that if there's a place where we should position ourselves is exactly in mastering rather than slaving that concept of HCI. But we need to do research. And research is not how to use an LMS in a classroom. It's not how to use a VLE. That's the old days. It's a commodity. Let's not make conferences any longer on these topics. If you go to BET and to Learning Technologies London, which are two good events, it's still a lot about the old way the old way of doing things, which is, you know, giving official credits, master credits, and just automating that process. It's good because everything starts by mocking up the past. When TV was invented, it was theater on a screen. And luckily, when e-learning was invented, it was all about, you know, automating traditional processes. But all this is much more about context-aware, intelligent, personalized support. And having a virtual coach shouldn't scare you. It will be your smart companion, a little bit like Google Home is when you need to do a recipe. But you will not make him cook the cake for now yet, because it gets burnt. So, I don't know, Jordan, say something?
Sorry,
okay.
Please, next question.
Just aware of the time.
Hello, good morning. My name is Maya Al-Hawari. I came all the way from the United Arab Emirates. I'm a PhD scholar in Hamdan bin Mohammed Smart University. I'm very happy to be in this conference, and I'm also honored. I was very interested in what you both had to say, and my question is to both of you. In this hype of artificial intelligence, I just want to say before I start, my research is on emotional intelligence and its effect on the digital transformation and disruption that we have today. So I feel that sometimes when I speak in conferences and in setups like this, I have a question that hits me all the time from the audience, that with the artificial intelligence hype that we have, what are we going to do with the human force that's coming out of the universities that you rightly mentioned that our students are and do have low skills as they're coming out of 4 years of university. So how do you balance that? Isn't that kind of contradictory? So that's the first part of the question. The second part is, what do we do with all the people that are living on this earth? And I just saw a video on a McKinsey report that by 2030, 55% of companies will be digitizing their services. So where do we go with all of us in the world? Thank you.
Nice questions. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. So about the balance of what is happening in the field of AI and the reality in terms of the education attainment. Yeah. So what I could tell you is only from experience that we are having. We are supporting specifically some projects where we try to apply artificial intelligence in education, more specifically machine learning in education, so that we learn from what is, let's say, patterns, so that we maybe advise better universities as to what is relevant on the labor market, only in this specific domain. This is from the policy perspective. More generally, in my personal view, I do agree with you that there is a little bit of an issue on the one side with the expectations and maybe also the dangers that we see through AI. It goes always together, and the reality. So I think what we need is to invest also a lot in the combination of, I like this very much, the technological skills and the social and communication skills, and this needs to go hand in hand. On your second question, well, I would always say that the history shows it that the employment rates are actually increasing throughout history. So if you go back 100 years ago, you had less machines. You certainly had less people who were working as a percentage, not absolute terms. And this has something to do with the fact that we are able to bring in let's say, populations in the workforce which have not worked before. And there was a question on gender, for example, and this is very much related to it. So I'm not at all pessimistic about that point. I think that with social progress, there is nothing which would prevent a balance, and even we see already today that that is happening in certain fields. But I think what is relevant is that we invest in the creative skills which make us distinct from the machines, as you nicely explained, and there would be many more opportunities arising from this. So it's very important to have a very, let's say, balanced picture on it, because I think there are also doomsayers. Yeah.
Yes, I just want to add, answering to this question from the Emirates. It's a place I love. I was there with Sheikh Abdullah talking about education revolutions at the beginning of the first one in digitization. And today you are the first government in Dubai which is adopting blockchain for all the certifications. You are the first one which is adding AI to the curriculum, streamlined in medicine, and so on. And you are the typical example of how greenfield is better. So you built a huge nation and architectural achievements where it was greenfield, actually brownfield. It was just sand. And if you think of Africa, today it's a greenfield of education. I mean, we tried it in a lot of ways, but the big forces that we have today are the witnessing that we did something wrong. I mean, we didn't master yet to bring education to the shores of Africa in a very effective way. Now, think that you could touch your virtual companion, you could make him learn how to teach, and you could push him over and give assistance to people on the other side where presumably you will not want to go to work, because otherwise you would already be there. So if you think it on this way, the tilting effect that intelligence in machines could have is huge. Obviously, always with a debate about the balancing part. I mean, emotional intelligence is a wonderful term which represents men, and catastrophic forgetting is something which dramatically represents machines. For those who are more technical, catastrophic forgetting is exactly what happens in an AI algo when something out of the skirts, out of the big data that you were forecasting gets there and ruins the algo. So by putting a different landmark, you screw up the algo. And today we have evidence of stickers put on the speed limits of self-driving cars, which screw up the vision algorithms of the cars, which is, you know, much more questionable than the ethics that today we are talking in debates. If the machine should, you know, save the mother with the pram, or and kill the driver, or what decision? I mean, that's ages yet from happening. But you still have, you know, very short-term achievements with very short-term questions that you should pose yourself, and, you know, we should just be positively talking about it. Okay.
There is one more question. Before that, people who know me, they know I'm very direct, and I know these questions come from community. Mao, the president of Alibaba, said that it depends upon where we put the value, whether we preserve the skills of...
Alibaba was rejected. He was rejected 4 times from Stanford University.
So what? So, I mean...
to understand what genius is better than in the past.
So his question was actually whether we preserve the skills of humans, those 2 robots, and another question is where we put the costs saved. Who takes benefit out of this? I agree with you that you mentioned some investment in the areas of issues, but in local environment and companies.
Yes, we are running, I don't know if it's in competition with the mainstream, the workshop that we are running with the Commission later on this afternoon, is it? We are going to have the second part of this presentation about the human skills. So there's a presentation, I don't know in which room it is, and it's, which one is it, sorry? 166, room 16. One of the parallel sessions is about how SMEs, in that case, but in general, human kind can survive. And I was saying before, Alibaba, the Alibaba CEO, Ma, was rejected 4 times from Stanford. Marconi was not invested by Italian government. Steve Jobs, we all know what the people thought about him at the beginning. The inventor of 3D printing consumerization with his Mark Britt, I think the name, it was a teacher and nobody wanted to lend him money. So the concept of talent is something that we should dramatically rethink in the next future.
Thank you, and we take the last question that the microphone is ready.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm from China, and I would like to ask you one question. That is, reckon in these recent years, and China has made a rapid progress in educational technology, as artificial intelligence, as you know, and also we have done a lot of work from the university level, and we have integrated e-learning into not only the teacher professional learning program, but also the principal training program. So my question is whether have you, I know EDM is a very famous e-learning community, and do you have any plan or any, I think, projects to consider to communicate or collaborate with China, especially for China Normal University? Thank you.
Is this the question for me?
It's for you, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a question for me, right?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. So the collaboration with the Open University and also a Smart University in Beijing is existing. We are collaborating in terms of our tools and instruments developed on both sides. For example, European Distance Learning, we collaborate with the China Smart University for Open Road and Belt initiative that they're taking place. I know your visits to Budapest University of Management and Economics that are also very successful, and I hope that we will find a possibility to talk during this conference and further communication on how to introduce new topics, of course, in Eden events in the future that you suggest.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm looking forward to talk with you further, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We continue the plenary session, and I don't know if we have the final speaker, but we have the following speaker already with us, who is Claudio Dondi, Senior Expert in Education and Training in Italy. Claudio has been invited to have a specific role in the conference General Rapporteur. So I would like to ask you, Claudio, to introduce your speech.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is it here? Hello?
Okay, this works better.
Such an amazing role as conference rapporteur. Now, the only benchmark I remember is Tony Bates, so you can understand how I feel under stress to do something comparable to a certain extent. Now, in the last 4 years, I've been a little bit out of the debate on learning technology. I've been still in the field of education, but this distance allows me, I hope, to get a general view on what is happening during this conference. We started very well, I think, with, for once, a policy review address that is systemic and is aware of the limitations of taking one priority at a time, and with a very stimulating, to a certain extent scaring, to a certain extent really addressing the point of how well can we solve, can we contribute from our community of learning technology, distance learning, the big challenges that are at the horizon, if we continue to work in a certain continuity and we don't change, at least partially, our way of thinking. Now, some of the old friends of Eden may remember the first research workshop in Prague. It was 2000 or 2001. And I was, for the first time, asked to make an intervention there. So I remember I was mentioning 7 capital sins of research on distance education. I don't remember all the 7 now, but I remember that one point that I was putting in evidence is the lack of integration. The fact that there were non-converging families of researchers in this domain. And the impact of a more integrated approach would have been, in my view, at that time, much bigger if we succeeded to get to a synthesis of these different perspectives on research on distance education. Pedagogical research, research on inclusion, research on human-technology interaction, on pedagogical research in general. Now, I went through the program of this conference. Sorry for this microphone is either nothing or too much. I went through the different sessions and the different titles. I think we made some progress. Every session, practically every contribution refers to one of the big challenges that we will face in the next session on policy aspects. But still, the feeling is that we are not yet very close to seeing the whole. There is the usual risk of going into depth on a smaller and smaller field, a risk that exists in modern research in general, that exists in the organization of research funding in the Horizon 2020 program. There are efforts to improve, and I think we should also make an effort to link together the different contributions that come. So this will be my concern in these 3 days. You will see me moving around sessions, trying to get some input for the final speech that I will do on Wednesday morning. So those of you who will still be here on Wednesday morning will have a diagnostic on how on 3 basic questions. Which challenges are at the center of our attention? Second point, how well is education as a whole not only facing, but I would say influencing these challenges? Education is not something that happens when everything else has happened. Education can be a driver of change, and we shouldn't well, of course, you can do nothing, that is the worst. You can adapt, that is much better, but you can also try to shape the future, and that is what I would like education to do. So how well is education influencing the future, and is distance education, open education, ICT in education contributing enough to this? Because in principle, we have a vocation to be the most innovative part of education. Are we succeeding within formal education to get a space? And in informal learning, are we knowing what is happening? Are we really on the spot, or are we just observing what individuals do with technology, sometimes learning, sometimes not? So these are the questions I'm working on in these days. I hope you like them, because I will report on that at the end of these 3 days. I wish you a successful conference, and see you on Wednesday. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now we have the final announcement on promoting online training opportunities of the workforce in Europe EU initiative that will be presented by André Richier from EU Commission, as I was informed. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so good morning. My name is André Richier. They are trying to upload my presentation. This is, sorry, a little bit just in time. I'm working for the European Commission and I'm familiar with Fabrizio, Claudio and the Eden Network for more than 20 years. I think the last time I addressed this community was in Zagreb in Croatia. I'm working in the Directorate General that deal with the internal market, industry, entrepreneurship and SMEs. And I'm working in the unit with key enabling technology, digital manufacturing and interoperability. Actually, the reason why I'm here is because we had an ongoing initiative which addressed the issue that you were talking about. And by the way, the good news is that we have a few billions of years ahead of us. So the doomsday is not for tomorrow, and there will be plenty of good work to be done. And I want to bring you to your attention this reflection that was brought by Anne Mettler, who is advisor to President Juncker, at a recent LinkedIn event which was organized in the European Parliament. She quoted Andreas Schleicher, that everybody knows obviously, from the OECD, who said that Europe, the children and the pupils and the students in Europe, they are overeducated, but they are underskilled. And that represents one of the challenges that we have to deal with. Over the last 10, 20 years, there have been an inflation of training opportunities, education opportunities, degrees, but at the same time, the employers are complaining that they don't get people with the skills that they need. And we see that there is a growing skills gap between the demand and the supply. So my participation here is from the demand side, where we are trying in an initiative that will cover this year and the next year to try to identify a kind of shared vision, common agenda between government, industry and higher education to see how we can bring more adequate training opportunities for the workforce and especially small and medium-sized enterprise. One of the key issues is to make sure that we have, of course, the right forum and the right partners to work on this. So we have contracted PricewaterhouseCoopers, the Eden Network, and Espace Mendes France to help us in this endeavor. Because if there is something that the Commission is extremely concerned is precisely this issue of skills. So I would a little bit challenge the remark that was been made by Fabrizio regarding the Oxford study, because it was made in 2013 and there have been here also a lot of revision and estimates. So actually the percentage of jobs that may ultimately disappear is much lower, but the job that will be impacted and the task that will be impacted is huge. So we need to figure out how we address this opportunity to create more jobs, to invent more jobs and to bring skills to people, preferably just in time and in cost-effective ways. The agenda of the Commission on Skills is something which is very ambitious. We have Digital Skills and Job Coalition, and here the goal, they are still trying good. The goal is to increase the capacity of the European society and workforce. And we have two basic approach and framework on this. We have this digital competency framework that all citizens and basic digital skills for the workforce people must have. And for the IT specialists, we have the European e-competence framework, which is a standard and for which we want to build and mature the IT profession. Because Because something that does not exist right now is a full-fledged recognized IT profession. It's not the case in medicine, it's not the case in engineering, it's not the case of architecture, but still in the field of IT, you don't have a well-recognized IT profession. And we are working, trying to address this. The other dimension of the skills agenda is to bring together the different policy makers and the different industry players to cooperate on better anticipating the skills need and working on solutions to deliver these skills need, and for which we need indeed flexible, open, distance learning opportunities. And here we have this blueprint for sectoral cooperation on skills, where we want to identify pilot sector on which we can develop pan-European platform and solution and roll them out at the national and regional level. And it's not just an exercise where we bring people to agree on what needs to be done and to develop solutions. It's also an exercise where we want to make sure that the different funding instruments and tools can better cooperate and sustain and help this transition of the workforce. And here, the slides are here. Hallelujah. So maybe...
You want me to help you? I can help you.
Maybe I can... I will move there.
Microphone over there.
Great, so it has... Now it's no longer working. This one. Yes, it works? You hear me? Okay? No, you don't hear me. So what do? We do hear you. It should work, yes? All right. Okay, so this is the name of the initiative that we have decided to launch at the end of last year. And it will cover 2018 and 2019. And the real goal is to have a better understanding of what is the state of play, agree on a shared vision agenda, and identify a possible roadmap to cover the years ahead until 2030. The idea is on top of what my colleague Georgie told you about the new proposal that the Commission has made in terms of education, regional policy, farming policy, social policy, etc., is to identify what will be the possible priorities and area where Europe can make a difference and where we could have a greater impact compared to the previous activities. And we would like also to get concrete recommendations, so how we move forward. Because you know, you are familiar with the different programs of the past. It's still very much call for proposals. And unless you have a clear goal and set of common objectives, the difficulty is sometimes that these call of proposals are going and the results are going in all kinds of directions with little synergy. So here the goal is from the demand side to stress what is needed, how cooperation should be enriched, and how we can also have greater synergy between different programs and instruments. I was just referring to this skills agenda that the Commission has put forward in 2016, and here I put in red these two which are highly relevant for this event. One, the focus on digital skills, so to have a comprehensive approach on digital skills through the coalition, and also this very sectoral pilot approach that is being supported very strongly by DG Employment, and where we hope that this will help to leverage also employment policies, but also the different funding mechanisms that exist at European, national and regional level. Well, I don't need to go that much into the key issue, you know them already, but one of the problems that we have is agreeing on common definition, agreeing on common approach. And this is where I was talking that for the lower level of the pyramid, so when it comes to the skills of the citizen, when it comes to the skills that all pupils, students, all workers need to have basic digital skills, we need to have a common reference. And this is where the digital competency framework, which has been developed by the GRC of the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, is extremely instrumental. Now, if you move and you address, as I was saying, this IT specialist area, where I strongly believe that we have to mature and better structure and supervise this profession, we need to have also the different tools and elements to define what the competences are, what the job profiles are, what the bodies of knowledge are, what the codes of conduct and ethics, and how we can also make bridges between formal education, informal education, and industry-based and training certification. Because increasingly, if we want to recognize the profession, there will be more focus on the issue of certification. And this is where we see that, and the numbers are quite big. So it's a huge challenge. So I would say that up to the green level, I mean, this is what the digital competency framework is all about. And up, the e-competence framework matters for IT specialists. Because we still have this issue that the supply is not meeting the demand, despite all the efforts. So the supply has improved, is good news. The demand is huge, especially with small and medium-sized enterprise. And here, for the time being, we have been able to increase the supply, but most of the supply is coming from lateral entries. So these are not people that go with full-fledged IT education. These are people who, I don't know, maybe if we are lucky, they graduated in mathematics and then got courses by Microsoft, Cisco, you name it, and then work an IT specialist. But there are many people who come from various fields, history, whatever. It's good. But still, these people get other courses and does not equip them necessarily to adapt for the new language, for the new tools and difficulties that will come with innovation in this area. And these people will most likely be automated also with the new tools. So this is why we need to better recognize this profession. We need to better provide training and recognition for the skills and the competence that these people may get. I was talking about this LinkedIn event organized in the European Parliament. I mean, everybody knows that there was a lot of ambitions behind the open and distance learning and universities, and then the MOOCs came, etc. But what is quite new with a platform like LinkedIn, which, by the way, was bought for 26 billion by Microsoft recently, is that they want, with the economic graph, to bring opportunities, not just opportunities for work, but opportunities also for people to improve their skills and get learning opportunities. So you will see, I guess, in the future, more and more of this platform, especially LinkedIn, entering the field of upskilling and reskilling people and offering job matching between supply and demand. This is, in a nutshell, the initiative that I was talking about. So, and this morning at 11:30, we have a workshop. So this is the second workshop. There will be further workshops in the course of this activity. By the end of the year, we will come forward with an interim report that will be widely shared, and you will have all opportunities to enrich, of course, not only the state of play, but help in shaping the vision and the policy agenda and recommendation from your perspective. Which are the main deliverables that we expect? So long-term vision and agenda up to 2030, better understanding how new initiatives can be designed at the EU and national levels. I was talking about the skills agenda of 2016, but I'm quite sure that with the new Commission, there will be also an update of this agenda that will come forward. We want also to have better guidance for the EU and member states policymakers in designing and implementing policies which are not only addressing innovation, but also having scalable, sustainable, impactful results. This is a little bit some statistics that you may see from the Digital Skills and Job Coalition, which is growing. So more than 400 members, 90 pledge, 21 national coalition by the end of this month. A very successful European Code Week, and there will be another one in October this year. And with my colleague from DG Education and Culture, DG Connect, so has launched a pilot project to provide cross-border traineeship for up to 6,000 students. So it's a pilot experiment for over the period 2018-2020. So if this works well, I mean, the idea is to scale it up, obviously. The blueprint for sectoral cooperation on skills, as I was talking, it's something which is extremely focused for the time being, because we have a system of screening and selecting sectors. And the idea is, once we have established this kind of platform and cooperation at the particular sector level, we want this to be a cornerstone of industrial policy. And this was presented at the EU Industry Day last February. And again, this will be next time shown and explained, and we want to build on this to scale effort and to reach greater number of people to be trained and skilled. So this is the first wave, which started and selected in 2017. So automotive, maritime technology, space, textile, and tourism, so a mixture of highly sophisticated domains with more labor-intensive activities. We want to have a good match and understanding of where the jobs of the future are and how we can scale and reskill workforce. The second wave will start at the end of this year, so we have here additive manufacturing. By the way, we are confident that by the end of this year, we hope that there will be a new knowledge innovation center of the EIT on advanced manufacturing, hopefully. We have also selected construction, maritime shipping, paper industry, and steel. We are currently selecting the third wave, and there will be a fourth wave. So basically, to select between 6 or 5 sectors each year, and for a period of 4 years to have these pilots with the view to scale them up and make them sustainable. The workshop I was talking about will also address these particular sectoral dimensions. And that's it. So here you have a lot of reference website where you can get more information about what we are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all outstanding presentations during this plenary. I hope the community will have a possibility to discuss with the issues presented in the workshop sessions. Before closing the opening plenary session, I would like to invite here Marina Rui, and I know there is also a bunch of flowers prepared. On behalf of Eden, we would like to thank University of Genova for invaluable support in organizing of this conference, and Marina, you are the person who contributed, I think, most. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to everybody.
So now the plenary session is closed. We're looking forward to meet you in the parallel sessions in half an hour.
So do you know how many proposals are there in the cooking?
And I apologize for
well, I was brought at the last minute, so that's why I sent my